Hey, and we are rolling. What's up, everybody? Uh, what is this? Episode 6 of Movies in the Minefield, doing one of my favorite films. This is one we talked about this film a little bit on a stream a little while back. It was just a riffing stream. We weren't planning to talk about this, but it was deep in the stream. We were like 3.5 hours in, and so I don't know if anybody. We had some people with us, but we're going to do a proper analysis of it today. I just finished watching because I was wondering, like, I've seen this movie several times and I watched it not long ago, but I was trying to rewatch before the stream and I had a really busy day and I was like, I don't know, am I gonna have time? I was like, all right, yeah, I have time. And so I
Yeah.
finished I finished watching the movie, I think it like 18 minutes ago. So
Yeah.
it's fresh and we're ready to roll. We got Bazed Lit Analyzer with us, his channel. I linked it in the bio, but the link didn't work, so I'm gonna have to redo it. Joining us once again. How you living?
Pretty good. Yeah. Shouts out to the chat right there. Hey, it's a Friday. It's summertime. It's Flag Day. Uh, what could be better, I guess? Let's look for a reason to do some positive posting. And I got to say, I'm pretty jittery, folks. I'm having a hard time, even harder time sitting still than I usually do because I'm mixing a Red Bull and a Logan Paul Prime drink. Man, this thing is packed with punch. Oh, unintended pun right there, I guess, but maybe pun intended, right?
Nah,
Logan
that was
Paul
a good
punch.
one.
Yeah, he's a
Yeah.
boxer now. That's because I watched this. I watched the Trump Logan Paul interview yesterday, and I know we're going to talk about Sicario, but I was surprised by that interview. There was a number of things that I took away from it. It was a Yeah, sipping that red, white, and blue. That's right. Taking a break from sipping that scissor. I guess no, that purple. No, so yeah, I'm looking forward to this one, man. I like you. I rewatched it this morning, and what a great flick, dude. I've seen this, I don't know, a million times. I saw it in the cinema, and this is a great movie. So I'm looking forward to this one. Talking about Alejandro.
Yeah.
That's that Lady Gaga song. Alejandro, Alejandro. Yeah, with
That's
Benicio.
true.
I've covered a lot of Benicio.
Hmm.
I've covered almost as much Benicio on my channel as Jake Gyllenhaal and then Brad Pitt and Denzel. I've covered a bunch of them recently. Benicio's got such great movies, and of course, this is Taylor Sheridan wrote this film, and Denis Villeneuve directed it. A bunch of his movies, so I'm looking forward to this one, man. This is a good choice.
Have we talked about China Moon? Have you ever seen that one?
Um, is China Moon the one with Ed Harris?
Yeah, yeah. That's a true neo noir. We talked about this during the Sin City
Yeah,
stream. There's a lot of people that talk about films like, oh, it's a neo noir, and it's not. That one is a
yeah,
true neo noir film.
yeah, yeah. I was confused that one with Bitter Moon, which I think is that the Polanski film? Bitter Moon, China Moon, Moon, China. Okay, no, that Trump interview, he goes, they were like, so do you think you're going to be president? And he was like, I think I am. I'm ready to throw some punches, not literal punches. And they were like, have you ever been in a fight? They asked him, have you ever been in a fight, Mr. Trump, Mr. President? And he said, never, no, never. I don't think I've ever been in a real fight. I fought my way out of Wharton Business School. That's about as close as it comes. I fight every day with the deep state. That was pretty good.
Do you remember we are going to get in the movie here? Last thing, do you remember when that newspaper clipping was going around during I think it was the 2016 election, and he was like his limo was taking him through, I guess,
Uh-huh.
Manhattan or something, and he told
Yeah.
his driver to stop and pull over because he saw this woman getting mugged, and like got out of the car and was like, "Yo, what are you doing? Like, leave her alone." And apparently he like scared the
No.
mugger off. I was like, "Can you imagine? You're just like some crackhead trying to mug some woman in Manhattan, and this like 6'4" blonde guy in a suit, like a $10,000 suit, gets out of a limo and it's like, yo, get out of here.
That's some Elvis shit. That's like something Elvis would do. That's like Elvis or that's like That's like Nick Mullen's story. No, it was Shane Gillis. It was Shane Gillis's story about Reagan and the Reagan event in 1981, where they were like, "Oh, I think I've been shot," right?
the
And so they
Hinckley
took
thing.
him, the Hinckley thing, and they took him to the hospital. And on the film, because you can watch the news clipping of it, and he gets up, and they're like, "We're gonna get a stretcher," and he's like, "No, I'm gonna walk into the hospital." And so he gets up and he walks in, and you see this guy outside, and he goes, "Hey, that's Reagan, man. That's what's up, baby." You know. But Elvis, I've got a picture of Elvis in his motorcycle cop gear, and he would go and pull people over on Elvis Presley Boulevard for speeding, and he could write tickets, and instead of writing him a ticket, he would write him an autograph, and they'd say, "I can't believe I got pulled over by Elvis. I'm going to bring you some peanut butter and banana sandwiches. You love that." And then the Memphis Mafia would show up and be like, "Elvis, you got to get back home. You can't," because he had to sneak out to do it. He snuck out on his own in a cop uniform. That's like an idea for a movie. That's like Maniac Cop, but it's Elvis. I don't know what that would be called. Because I was going to do a stream on Maniac Cop and on Maniac Cops, or people who get pissed off and lose it or something. People who say fuck it. I mean, like Falling Down. I watched that movie Violent Cop this week with Takeshi Kitano, which is it's pretty dope movie. It's like Dirty Harry, but it's Japan.
Oh, nice.
And like at the beginning of the movie, Clockwork Orange style, you see this old homeless guy in Japan getting mugged by these ne'er-do-well teens, and one of them, they ride their bikes home, and the next thing you see, Takeshi Kitano walking up, knocks on the door. The mother's like, "Oh, he's like, "Do you have a son?" She's like, "Yeah, he's upstairs." And he just walks into the house. He's like, No, it's okay. I'll be up. He walks into the kid's bedroom and slaps him around like 24 times. It just walks out, and it's like Violent Cop.
That's sick. I could
Yeah, pretty sick. Yeah. Yeah.
I've been trying to get into Japanese films. I just ordered 1 or 2 from Criterion a couple weeks ago. So
which ones?
Oh gosh, I could have told you if you hadn't asked me. I'd have to look it up.
Are they Kurosawa?
Kurosawa
was kind of where to start with Japanese cinema.
Let me see if I can. This is, folks, this is very important. So give me just a moment. I'm actually going to.
My favorite Kurosawa, to fill it in, my favorite Kurosawa film is Throne of Blood, because it's a fantastic adaptation of Macbeth. Seven Samurai, Darth Maul. Seven Samurai is what they used for A Fistful of Dollars, and then forget the other one they used for a few dollars more. That's not the Hidden Fortress. It's Yojimbo, maybe. The Hidden Fortress is what influenced Lucas to make in Star Wars for C-3PO and R2-D2. He got his characters from that. And then Ran, his movie Ran is King Lear. And then there's also a movie called Les Samurai, which is not, I don't think that's Kurosawa. He also did a Hamlet. There's also a Hamlet Kurosawa. But the Samurai
Samurai is actually
that's Alain Delon.
Yes, that's actually one of the ones I ordered. It's actually a French movie. And then the other one was The Hidden Fortress.
Yeah, that's Kurosawa. Yeah.
Okay.
I've got a few of them on DVD here. And then there were a bunch of great Korean films in the 2000s. I used to see them at the cinema, at the local cinema in Belfast a lot. They were coming out all the time. There's a Boy, Lady Vengeance, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Bittersweet Life. There's a bunch of really violent, good 2000s Korean films. And then Korean cinema sort of hit its apex, with what's the one that won the best picture a few years ago? Yeah, Parasite. That's right. Chan Wok Pook or whatever his name is. Chan Park Wook. Yeah.
I remember people getting mad because he did his acceptance speech in Korean. And it's like, why would he not do it in Korean?
Yeah. You guys, Maddie, when he saw that acceptance speech, he was thinking, I already know what he was thinking. He was thinking Robert Duvall's little monologue from Apocalypse Now. Long, dong, wop, or dop. Damn, names sound all the same.
I was most definitely not thinking that. All right. Bong Joon-ho. Thank you, Darth. Yeah, that's I knew it was something like that.
There's Train to Busan. That's the same guy that did the recent Brad Pitt film, with the train. It wasn't that bad. I like Brad Pitt movies. So yeah, shouts out to Toledo right there. But we're not covering any of that shit. I mean, any of that stuff tonight. We're covering Sicario, right? Done by a French Canadian about CIA, global drug operations with a Colombian based in Mexico. So
so this is I saw this movie. I think I didn't see it when it came out. I didn't see it in theaters. I don't think I saw it till like 2016 or maybe early 2017. And I was blown because like I've always liked Benicio del Toro ever since I first saw. I think Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas was the first thing I saw him in, and
yeah,
I was like,
we're gonna carve a Z in his. I just want to carve a Z in his forehead, man.
And I was like, he's fantastic, it was a great casting. You had Josh Brolin, Emily Blunt, Jeffrey Donovan. John Bernthal shows up. John Bernthal, I've been telling people this. He is the new Ethan Hawke because you remember a time every single movie you would watch, it's like, oh, there's Ethan Hawke. He just shows up in everything. And now John Bernthal, who he and Jeffrey Donovan had no interaction in this movie, but they actually did in Shot Caller, which is another one of my all-time favorite films.
Bernthal's great. His favorite movie of mine is Wolf of Wall Street. He's got a small but pivotal role in that movie. Remember, he's got that scene where he says, sell me this pen. And he goes, all right, you need to write the bill? All right. And he goes, yeah. And he goes, I need something to write with. He goes, here you go, pen. Right. He's got a great role in that where he's the weightlifter in the yard, right? Who's like selling, what's the thing they all took? What's the thing they all, he's selling lewds or whatever in the yard. Yeah, he's good. He's good in this movie. He's really good. Everyone in the movie is great.
Yes,
Emily Blunt is Emily Blunt is probably the weakest person in the movie. Rewatching it today, I noticed some things about her performance, which I'll get into. And then it's got the guy from. People forget about this. It's got. Hold on, drop my cigarette. It's got the guy from Get Out in it. What's his name? Daniel, whatever his name is. Her kind of partner, black guy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he kind of goes unnoticed in the movie, which is kind of good and bad. I mean, he fits in this role, but yeah, everyone in it is very good. It's a solid story. It's really, really pretty good.
Yeah, very, very well written. So yeah, I guess we'll just start off. So it starts on a raid, right? This because I guess she's what are they FBI? I think.
Yes. Yeah, they're FBI.
They're like an FBI SWAT team, and so they're going up on this house. It's like they think they have hostages there, and so they go in, drive their. It's not a tank, but it looks like a big UPS van. They just drive it straight into the wall of the house, put a huge hole in the
special delivery.
Yeah, just Kool-Aid man the place.
Okay, what does he say? Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly. Oh, Maddie dropped out there. There he is. Okay. Yeah, no, the movie starts off. The movie starts off with that, and this is interesting because we do see it is kind of taken from. You ever seen Traffic? The movie The Traffic that Benicio's in. Benicio won Best Supporting Actor for that movie. It's 2000, and this movie kind of does what that one does in terms of like the sepia tone of the Texas. I think they start off in Arizona, but we see this sort of sepia tone. We see the contours of the earth, and then we see these black figures, armed black figures, SWAT and FBI coming over the contours, coming down into the house, and we're in like a perfectly domestic suburban neighborhood, and we anybody watching knows what this is, right? We're gonna find tunnels. We're right on the border. It's interesting how also one thing I noticed was how the way that I guess it's drone, it looks like drone footage, kind of helicopter footage. Now they use drone footage, but the drone footage of the way that the border wall serpentines its way through the landscape is mimicked by the way that the raiding team kind of serpentines its way over the contours of what the fuck? Why is this opening up? Over the, so we've got this wall, a wall of people, and we got a border wall. And the movie is about, we think it's about putting an abutment, an impediment against the drug trade.
Right.
But it ends up being something where we're permeating the border, we're what's the word? Permeating? Perforating the border? We're perforating the border, and we're introducing a form of shaking the tree and ordo ab caio, right?
Yes.
They're going to create chaos and make order out of it. So,
yeah, that's a good. Excuse me, folks. I'm trying to get over being sick. That's a good point because there's a lot of. I hadn't really noticed this before until I watched it just a little while ago. Is that there's a lot of landscape shots where it just shows this vast, where it's just shrubs out in the desert, and it's roads. There's like a one road that's cut through the desert, and so we see that it's a very stark contrast between. It's a very simple kind of landscape, and then you have these like figures in black who look like totally out of place. I mean, it's kind of a harsh not juxtaposition, I guess contrast to the sort of natural landscape. And it almost seems it seems unnatural for anything to be there. So even when there's a house there, it seems unnatural. It's like, why are people living here?
Yeah, it does. Hold on, I got a bug. Go away, bug. So one thing, one of the themes in the movie that was particularly evident to me this time was the depiction of Mexico as a literal and figurative alien landscape. So it's obviously alien to the United States. It's a foreign country, but also it's trying to depict it's trying to do two things. The movie is trying to portray the alien landscape as one that is foreign to the United States in terms of where the product is coming in from, but also it's trying to do the opposite. It's trying to show that, I mean, Jeffrey Donovan has that great bit about how, we think that this is for a purpose. Later on, there's another guy who says, where do you think we learned this from? Right. That's Fausto says it at the end. Where do you think we learned these tactics from?
Yes, I do want to get into that. Well, I guess we can do that later. But I did make some notes on that.
But the other thing I noticed here was that there's one scene where I found a 2001 Space Odyssey homage. This has to be intentional. If not, then it's kind of filmmaking provenance, I suppose. And that is that there's a scene where sort of midway through the movie, there's a series of landscape shots, and we see Juarez. We're coming into Juarez, and we see landscape, mountain, hills, city, overhead shot, pan shot, and it reminded me completely of the scene in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where when he's going to Jupiter and beyond, and we go through the diamond formation. He's taking the space trip. So after what's his face in 2001 goes through the space trip through the holographic tunnel into the Star Child future or whatever, there's a series of thermal landscape shots of Jupiter, right, where it switches, and it's very stark when you watch it. And I suppose what that's trying to show us is that, again, we're taking a trip into a place where we don't understand. And that's exactly the theme of the movie, because Benicio, at the end of the movie, he caps the movie off by saying, you don't belong here. You're in the land of wolves now, and you're not a wolf. Well, the viewer is also supposed to be put in that position, that we are being introduced to something that we understand it watching, I suppose, analytically, but for the movie going audience and for the public at large, and for even us, there are things about this that we don't understand, especially in terms of how the product moves, how there's a complete invisible economy that most people ignore, most people don't know about. Josh Brolin says the thing about 20%, until we stop 20% of the American public from, he says snorting and smoking this shit. We have to do what we can to control the thing, to have some kind of order with it. Now that's partly disingenuous, right? Obviously. But again, that marks the layers of deception in this movie, because the whole movie is also about deception, which is crazy because we're being deceived from the very beginning. everything that we see is not what we expect. When we first come into the very first scene and we come into the house, what do they see? Well, they raid the house. She shoots the guy who's standing in the room. He shoots at her with a shotgun. It blasts through the walls, and we see there are people buried in the walls, right? So it's an abattoir. It's a death house. And then the guys are trying to unlock the tunnel, the trap door, and then there's an explosion. So now we've got IEDs, and that matches what Emily Blunt's partner says about I saw this shit in Iraq all the time. I don't know about you, but the first time you were watching this movie, when the guy discovered the trap door after the raid is over, were you thinking, "Don't fuck with that thing. There's going to be a bomb"?
I was thinking, I was like, I didn't think a bomb, but the first time I was like, he should not be doing that. Like something's going to happen. And there's a few things on that are kind of interesting. Just to go back for a second, like you were talking about, like with the deception and kind of at the end where we're doing nonlinear analysis here, folks.
Oh yeah, for sure.
At the end where he says that thing about this is a land of wolves now, and you were not a wolf. That also is kind of goes back to what Graver, the Josh Brolin character, says when he tells her, like, this is after the incident in Juarez, where he tells her, he's like, this is like how it is. Like, this is what happens when they get, dug in, is like, that's how you get this kind of, basically full-blown warfare in the, in the streets. And the thing with it was because I think this was the first time I'd watched, or maybe the second time I'd watched the movie since I'd done the Drug Cartels Do Not Exist stream.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was kind of watching it with that in mind. And what struck me is that, what we're told about the cartels, all these people, they're so far beyond anything. They're like their own armies, they're superior, and it's this huge battle to try to beat them. But look at what they're doing. Okay, they're hiding bodies in a foreclosed house in, some random sleepy residential neighborhood. The guy who's guarding the place has a 12 gauge, and they're using like an IED, which is a fairly crude kind of device. And so this is not, when you think, okay, these people, they've got all this money, they've got all this power, they're these huge international criminal network, which they are, but it's also, we're led to believe like, oh, they've got helicopters and drones and tanks, and it's like, okay, then why do they have street level gangsters? And this also is when they have the incident on the bridge going from Juarez back to El Paso. Who are they using for the hit? They're using guys in these they're using like street level gangsters in these dumpy, cars that are about to fall apart. And so you could say like, okay, well, whatever, those guys will go do it. But it's like, you think they would have more precision if what we are told about how advanced the cartels are is actually true.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that it took me a while to realize that what Jeffrey Donovan says in that speech, and by the way, folks, a nonlinear analysis is perfectly appropriate to this movie, because the movie, usually that is appropriate to analysis, because you have to take the thing with its microcosm and macrocosm. You have to look at the particular points and then look at it holistically. So the part and the whole. And we can't do that without looking at the whole, because it doesn't move in sequence. It doesn't move sequentially or even chronologically at points. I mean, it moves literally chronologically in the movie. We go through it piece by piece. But the whole point of the movie is that the central character, Alejandro, who seems to be sort of hidden in the background, ends up being in the forefront, and then ends up, the whole purpose is to be in the background. So because he's the infiltrator into the cartel, and then he comes back into the foreground, and then he goes back into the background. So we're playing a sort of game of shadows here. And we learned that his backstory is that he was from Medellin, and that what happened to his family that gives him vengeance, and that he is the Sicario. I think that sort of goes unnoticed in this movie. The movie is called Sicario. Who's Sicario? I found myself forgetting who is to be identified by the very title. Well, it's Alejandro. It's Benicio del Toro, which doesn't seem to make sense when you see him, but he's hiding in plain sight within the movie. he even has that part where he says about John Bernthal, Emily Blunt says, I was seduced by a hitman. And he says, he's no assassin. He was sent here to find out what you know. Well, that's because Benicio is the assassin and the guy to find out what she knows. That's the whole point of the movie.
And it also, just real quick, not to interrupt, but just I wanted to make this point that if you think back to the first thing we see on screen when it starts coming in from black, it's actually not the raid. It's a what's called etymology of the word.
That's right.
Sicario, and it comes from the word zealot, where it says, that was for people in Jerusalem who were basically like trying to drive the Romans out. So it's this idea of someone who was zealously trying to keep, people who are threatening their way of life out.
Yeah, this also ties in with the etymology of the word assassin. The English word assassin. Assassin comes from hashish, and I learned that from the Rimbaud poem "Morning of Drunkenness," where he says he ends it with. And Henry Miller wrote a book called "The Time of the Assassins." I talked about this in my Outremer stream on the Templars. Of course, the Templars were arch enemies of these guys called the Assassins, and the Assassins were a group of loyal fanatics to the Old Man of the Mountain, was his name, a kind of drug kingpin. And they're called assassins, hashishin, because they would drug themselves in order to go into battle, to be invincible in battle, and then sort of glide into the afterlife if they're killed in the cause and martyred. So that ties in with the whole drug trade in the movie. What was I going to say about Benicio and Alejandro? Oh, yeah. So getting low-level people and hiring out contractors, a form of contractor, is also perfectly in line with the global and especially with the United States MO. I mean, Frank Kitsen's book, Frank Kitsen developed gangs and counter gangs with the Mau Mau's in Kenya. That was exactly that. How do you infiltrate the people who are causing trouble in the colonial atmosphere? Well, you hire gangs of low-level criminals, give them a little bit of training, and hire them as gangs and counter gangs to form fake flags and psyops. And we do this all the time now. I mean, people think of even people think of like the CIA hitman, right? Or the CIA assassin as a guy who's CIA. Well, he's got a CIA contract. It's usually just a Green Beret, right? So that is military. That's military training, but he's not labeled. He's not like a guy trained in a CIA facility for the most part. I mean, they do have that. They have, paramilitaries and specially trained divisions, special activities division. But those people, again, are usually contracted out. And this is their version of that. And where do they learn this? Learned it from us, right? They had to have learned it from us. How do you move? I mean, I just did an analysis of The Counselor, the Cormac McCarthy movie. Same thing. End of Watch, the Jake Gyllenhaal movie. Same thing. Now those are fictional accounts, but they are probably more truthful than the factual accounts. And I happen to have the copy of the book here, if anybody's interested, that elucidates all of this in detail. And that's Alfred McCoy's The Politics of Heroin. This is the seminal account of how especially heroin moved into the country with the Golden Triangle. It's also interesting that the FBI partner, Daniel, what's his name, mentions Iraq and Afghanistan, especially Afghanistan, with the Golden Crescent. I mean, it's the same thing. Moving massive amounts of product from one country to another, whether it's the French connection or the Afghan connection or the Haqqani network or Kun Sa in Burma. All of these networks are obviously, Air America. We hear about massive pallets of cash moving to U.S. Air Force bases, black budgets. These things are all done in cooperate. They have to be done in cooperation with either Intel or with Barry Seal, right? We hear about all these things. So this isn't like a group of nobodies who've banded together because they had a hard life and they're moving this amount of product and this amount of money.
Yes, yeah, no, very, very good points. And there's another angle to this.
I'm not schizophrenic. That was a bug.
Because I don't have the copy of Drug Cartels Do Not Exist in here with me, but I pulled it up online. And because he talks about Zavala, Oswaldo Zavala, who wrote this, talks about Sicario. in here. And one of the things I just want to read this really quick because I thought it was interesting. Because there's another angle than just like the trafficking itself. He says, along with the other narco narratives, Sicario shows the desire for geopolitical control that is structured around the logic of the security agenda as a state project. The original causality of the film is then reversed, and the plot implies that the loss of U.S. dominance over Latin American drug trafficking was the original condition of possibility for trafficking organizations to reach their northern border. Less interested in fighting drug trafficking in their own hemisphere, the U.S. government is shown in the film as determined to regain the same political and militaristic control of the region as it did in the past, especially during the many global conflicts of the Cold War. And so this is where we see the return of the kind of Cold War sort of narratives, and that comes out of because they depicted this in Narcos, which I've been kind of slowly working my way through. That is the way that basically the cocaine trade came to Colombia, is when the U.S. overthrew Salvador Allende in Chile and then propped up the fascist dictator Pinochet, and he basically was like running the drug, or he was running the drugs, but he was like pushing the traffickers and the people who were making the drugs out of Chile. And so that shows like how they wound up in Colombia. And now another point on that is, if you study Latin American history, then like South American history, I should say, then the 20th century, then that the U.S. has long had a vested interest and has gone to insane lengths to retain control over the natural resources, and that's what arguably what Operation Condor, which is part of what the U.S. propping up all these fascists in South America was about, because like Salvador Allende, who got elected, who was a socialist, elected to president of Chile, he was going to nationalize. I think he did actually nationalize one of the industries, and so the corporations, they couldn't let that happen, and so they used the CIA, which, as Jay Dyer has talked about extensively, is basically the private army of the capital class. They went in, and so it's like, okay, if they're going to control, the oil, the timber, the precious metals mining, the fruit, why would they also not control the drug trade?
Right. Yeah. Even in The Counselor, Cameron Diaz's character, she's the female head of a cartel, discusses that. She mentions in one part about how the last time she saw her parents was right before they were thrown out of a helicopter. So she's supposed to be, either Chilean or Argentinian. And there was much more about that in the original movie before they cut it. And actually, side note, she was supposed to have a much more, I think she's Argentine. I think she's supposed to have an Argentine accent in the movie, and then they made her redub the entire movie in a more anglicized fashion. So because of that, she refused to do any press for the movie. And that's one of her last roles, was The Counselor. And she's really good. She's really, really good in it. She's very dark in the movie. A great book about this, by the way, is the movie Whiteout. The movie. This is a book. It's not a Sega Genesis cover. This is a book. The book Whiteout, The CIA Drugs and the Press by Alexander Cockburn and Jeffrey St. Clair. This is the kind of a classic book. And the last time I read this, here's my note at the beginning of the book. Nazis, heroin, Contras, Oliver North, Pablo Escobar, secret police, cartel, CIA, Vietnam, Air America, Mao Zedong, Khmer Rouge, MK Ultra, Lucky Luciano, Key Gordon Liddy, Che Guevara, and Reagan. Excellent cast of characters. So check this book out. Another book that deals with the history of drugs and the drug trade in this country. Well, there's another one. This one is about Afghanistan and the opium crop, how drugs, thugs, and crime are reshaping the Afghan war. It's kind of dated now. It's kind of a normie book, but this is by Gretchen Peters. This is a good book on this globalist aspect. Then, of course, Alfred McCoy's book. I mean, this book, if you don't have this book, you got to read it. It's like 700 pages. It's a fantastic book. And then another one is this book right here, I first read this in 10th grade. I had a copy from the school library, and I managed to buy a copy, which I last read in 2016. This is Hepcats, Narcs, and Pipe Dreams, History of America's Romance with Illegal Drugs. Great book right here. So some reading resources for the chat out there.
Yes, always, looking for good reading materials. So yeah, one of the things with
Jethro writes, "I buy gold. I buy gold with Roslyn Capital." Yes, G. Gordon Liddy, R.I.P. G. Gordon Liddy.
Yeah. Is one of the things that's interesting is Kate, the Emily Blunt character, her partner Reggie. Because like after they find these bodies that are all like mangled and decomposing in the walls, then everybody's like outside throwing up, and so they mentioned later that he was in Iraq. Now we don't know exactly what he was doing in Iraq, but because there is a line later on when they go into the tunnel, and then the special forces guys or whatever, Delta Force, they say something about like, oh, it's nice, or something about having like to babysit the other people. So you could say that's kind of arrogance on their part, but it's also it makes you wonder, like, what did this guy, like, how much combat did he actually see? Because that's a gnarly thing to run into, but to have that like level of, and it shows that even though these people do SWAT, like these people are not used to real violence and carnage. I mean, they've never seen something like this.
I found this part of the movie. That's a good point. I just want to say I found this part of the movie. So one, when I heard that, I immediately thought of a guy I know, one of my friends who was a U.S. Army Ranger in Iraq and Afghanistan. He did multiple combat tours, and he will often mention, his experience dealing with intelligence. And there was one particular time when he was at a FOB, a forward operating base, and he said that this place was, out in the wilds. I think it was in Afghanistan. It was out in the wilds, and every day there's another perimeter where only the spec op teams guys would be. And he said that his way of describing the teams guys is exactly like we see in the movies, which is basically that, like, they have their own set of rules. They don't have to interact. They can kind of do what they want. They look shaggy. They're supposed to, fit in with the indigenous population, or at least, they don't have to play by the normal rules of the U.S. military conduct and appearance. And he said that every day there was one guy who was never, this guy was never in uniform. He had his own Hilux truck, and all day he would weight lift. He was just this gigantic buff guy. And that he said that, my friend told me that there was a drop. There would be a drop once a week, and you never knew when or where it was going to be. And he found this disconcerting because the Rangers, although being attached to the special operations guys, they still went by timetables and the military code. They needed to know when and where things were going to be because they're at a forward operating base. And so when this would happen, they'd be told about 5 minutes beforehand, get your guys out here and set a perimeter. And their job was just to set a perimeter. But the spec op guys were right there at the LZ, at the landing zone, and a chopper would come in, drop a package, and then take off. And he was never allowed to touch the package, never allowed to be, or to have any kind of contact with it. They would take it into their base, and it could be anything. It could be weapons, drugs, cash, servers, microchips, computers. It could be food. It could be anything. But then at night, he said, this guy, I forget his nickname for the guy, but this guy would go out at dusk every night in black, get in his truck, load a pallet or a package onto the back of it, and take off. And he had no one with him. He was just all alone. And then every day at dawn, he would come back into the perimeter and then do the same thing over again. And I found that really interesting because, the way that they portrayed in the movie is that this guy had contact with them and that these guys are shady. That's exactly what I'm talking about here. That you can't really trust these guys. They're going to break the rules. I think the movie does a good job of portraying intelligence, and especially the Delta Force guys, is basically that, you're on a need to know basis and all that. You don't know. The movie actually really shows us a great example of why this is the case, because they have to be completely, if everything is controlled in terms of the throughway of intelligence. One thing that what's the guy's name? What's the partner's name? Reggie. One thing Reggie ends up doing is compromising the whole thing. He's the one who brings in the guy who's about to kill Emily Blunt, and he doesn't do that purposefully. He just knows him from operations, so that's why they don't do that. Now they end up using that to their benefit, right? But that wasn't, the movie shows that it wasn't a planned thing in the movie, and I think that the uncertainty of the whole thing, in the firefight scene at the end, the rain, the Delta Force guys are like, free fire, brother, whatever they say, free shooting. So there's no military rules of engagement in this thing. They're going to come around corners and they can shoot however they want. They got free reign. But when they get back, they're like, yeah, except we had to babysit those two assholes. So they've got a guy attached to them. And one thing that I thought was it was dramatized and slightly disingenuous was when they come to the house and then they're all outside in separate places, like throwing up. I thought, okay, come on. We don't need this. That's kind of exposition. That is one of the weak points of the movie, telling us how we should think about this. Now, we already feel sick at seeing the bodies inside the house. They do an even better job of this in End of Watch, where they walk into a closet and there's just bodies all over the basement. It's just, it's gross. But we didn't need to be told to feel sick about this. And I found it kind of, it's like in that movie, The Little Things, I just covered, where one of the people asked Denzel, the landlady asked Denzel, how do you get used to the smell? And he says, well, hopefully you don't. Right. And so they would be used to this. They know what they're getting into. Now, the FBI is obviously attached to the house because they're looking after, they found it because of the money and banking irregularities and all that. But she learns that she's leveling up to something that's far beyond her pay grade, and she's only attached to the operation because they need a domestic agency attached to it, right, in order to justify it legally. But yeah, I found that part a little bit weird.
Yeah, another thing with the rules of engagement is there's actually a reference to that, because one of the guys asks Graver if he was like, oh yeah, we're going to talk about the rules of engagement. He says, what are the rules of engagement? He kind of wryly is like, yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
And then it's implied that they just never talk about it, and they go in and because what they're doing is like extremely illegal. I mean, if you're looking at like rules of war or law enforcement or anything, I mean, they're just gone basically totally rogue.
Yeah.
And so then when she gets brought after the raid, she gets brought in, and Graver's in there, like flip-flops in this conference room, and with the, people from the other agencies, from the FBI and whatnot. And one of the things I thought was kind of odd, and I hadn't really picked up on this before, there's a mention of like Fausto Alarcon, and they say he's number 3 in the Sonora cartel, but no one knows who he is. And it's like they can't find him. He's totally off grid. And it's like, well, how do you know who this guy is if you don't know? How can you say like, oh, he's number 3 in the cartel if you don't know who he is? Like, you don't know what he looks like. So like they're either lying. I think they're lying, because how would you even get that intel unless you just heard the name? But it's like, if all you know is the name, then how do you know that he's the number 3 in this cartel?
Well, I suppose they know, because the same way that they find out where the number 2 and the number 3, where the other guys are, right? When they capture the guy from the jail in Mexico, in Juarez, and then they bring him back, there's that scene in the base where they obviously, it's implied that they are, that he's R-worded, right? In the thing, he says, now you will find out what hell is in Yankee land, right? Which sounds like hell anywhere. And you hear sound. It took me a long time to understand, was it because it looks like he's going to waterboard him, right? He brings in the water in, but he's doing something terrible to him, because we hear these kind of sounds and grunts and moans. But that's the way that they find out. They trotcher him to give the guy up. So I suppose it's through that. But like you said, yeah, it seems it seems like they would just be able to find the guy through doing a Bill Binney Prism operation, and then looking at the metadata. But I suppose there are people, especially in insulated criminal networks that, you can't find or whatever. Maybe they're no tech. It doesn't look like he's no tech living in that nice house that he's living in at the end. But I don't know. I guess they have their own network. They have their own world. They've got their own economy. They've got their own everything. So, but yeah, I think they would know. They state they know who he is. They know his name. Right. We don't know who he is, but we know his name.
I think it seems to be implied that, I don't know. I think they look at he's actually the number one.
Yeah. Fausto is the number one guy. That's who they're making their way up to. Right.
Yeah. Because they said, although they described him as, I think, number 3. I wrote this down. It was number 3 in the Sonora cartel, but he's implied to be number 1 because those 2 brothers, Guillermo and whatever the other one was, later on at the end of the film, when Alejandro tells him, he's like, oh, do you know who I am? I'm a jefe. He's like, take me to your jefe.
Yeah.
So he's like saying, he's like, oh, I'm a boss. But he's like, no, like, you're not the boss. Take me.
No, you're the jefito. We're looking for the jefe. Yeah. Yeah. The jefelito. I don't know. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, the thing, one of the interesting things with that Trocher scene is, like, it's I keep saying implied, but there's a lot of implied in the film. A lot of it's not always apparent. Graver seems to kind of be a psycho, like an actual psycho, because when later on, when Alejandro is torturing the John Bernthal character in the back of the car, when he finally starts talking after he's just brutalized this guy, you can see him. They show him he starts laughing to himself, and even the Jeffrey Donovan character, who's a hard case, like shoots people, doesn't care, like he's like, that's what he's all about, is doing. You can tell he's one of those guys. He's like, I love this is what I do. Even he, whenever Alejandro comes in the room to torture Guillermo, he's like, okay, I'm gonna go now. Like, even he, as much of a hard case as he is, like, he does not want to see what's about to happen.
Well, I think the okay, I gotta go now is also a plausible deniability. Whatever his role is, he can't know about what's going to happen. He turns the camera off in that scene. Very sketchy, right? But it kind of reminded me of Heat, right? I'm gonna do what I do best. Take scores. You're gonna do what you do best. Try to stop guys like me, right? For me, the juice is the action, right? I mean, this is no, man. He's not a psycho. He's just a guy who likes, dudes being dudes, man. He just likes hanging out with the fellas. And I mean, that's kind of that is ironically kind of the impression you get after the op is over at the end of the movie. When they come out of the tunnel, they're all high-fiving and shit. They're like, fuck yeah, get some. But yeah, you definitely get the case that he's a psycho. Well, I mean, because the movie is also deceptive because it makes it seem like this is a good guy to have on your side. He's unconventional. He's got his flip-flops on. He seems chill. He sleeps in the plane. Everything he does is kind of beach bro sort of, but he also is the guy who's like, I'm going to make sure that your daughter, the thing he says about her, I'm going to make sure that, the difference between you getting sent to hell, a prison in Juarez, or you getting sent to, not Folsom. What's the prison he mentions? You're in a kill house in Folsom or whatever the prison was he mentioned. Yeah. So he has the ability to determine his future. But he certainly does seem pretty psych. He's great. Josh Brolin is great in this movie.
Oh yeah, no, he was fantastic. And one of the things is, I've heard someone, I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, but I've heard people say that one of the distinctions about psychopaths is they don't have any fear. And it's clear he has some kind of, the Josh Brolin character Graver, he has some kind of training, but he's clearly not on the same level as like Alejandro or the Delta Force guys or anything like that. And so the fact that he seems totally calm under no matter what happens, doesn't really get rattled, shows no fear whatsoever, that seems to me to be another indication that this guy like actually might be a psychopath.
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe that's armchair psychology.
Well, I think the only fear in terms of psychos tends to be the fear of self-preservation or losing face. So not self-preservation bodily, but self-preservation in terms of people finding out what they've been doing. So that's why when she says the thing about, I'm going to tell it's so funny too. She's like, I'm going to tell everyone. It's like, oh, you're going to tell the New York Times, right? Who's going to what are you talking about? But he's like, that would be a big mistake. Even the thought of that it's not fear, but it establishes some sort of seed of, we need to keep a watch over this person, you know. You were mentioning earlier the operations on the bridge and the shootout, and the movie again does a great job of that. It shows that it shows that one of the guys is like, oh, this is going to be on the front page of every newspaper, and Donovan's like, no, it won't. Nobody will know about this. Nobody will even care. And he's right. He's right, because first of all, the culture of the people trying to make their way into the country have no interest. They gain nothing by cooperating with anything that's going to compromise their ability to come into the country. That's what the sequel is about. Day of the Soldado. It's all about the immigration issue and everybody coming in, right? And how this sort of makes its way, again, perforating, I suppose, the border. This always reminds me of the way when they play. Oh, by the way, Fausto obviously has a sort of literary significance here. I mean, he's a Faustian character. He's made the devil's bargain, whether that's literal or figurative, to gain the thing that he has. Right? He has a family, but he's on top of the world. But every day he sends people to their death. He's in control of all this stuff, but he's in a place of supposed wisdom because he's at the top of this pyramid. That's obviously a Faustian allegory. But I always think of placing people in positions like that. The best analogy I can think of would be the Troubles in Northern Ireland, especially with the IRA, because the word collusion first came to me back right after Good Friday Agreement, because it was in Northern Ireland all the time. It was mentioned in the newspapers freely, these accusations of collusion between the military and between paramilitary or terrorist units, especially with regards to the loyalists to the English. But there was a guy that was rumored to be at one of the heads of the IRA Army Council, who went by the code name Steak Knife. And then I've got a book on it. It turns out that was supposedly true. This guy Freddie Scappaticci, who was the head of the internal security unit within the IRA. So he's kind of like he's an enforcer for the IRA Army Council. In other words, his job is to root out spies, but of course he's going to turn out to be the spy, just like in The Departed, right? The guy at the tip is going to be the main guy who's actually the guy trying to eliminate people who can find out what he does. So he's placed, and they may not even know that, right? But he's placed at the top and makes his way to the top of the thing, to the top of the food chain, so they can control the thing from top down and from the bottom up.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Very, very good points. Yeah, I like that because they described Alejandro, his cover. They said he's a State Department agent who specializes in responding to escalating cartel activity, right? Which is I mean, that's such a vague kind of description. And then to go back to something we were talking about a few minutes ago, is he says that when they're at the meeting, kind of gaming the whole thing out, the operation to go get Guillermo out of that jail in Juarez, he tells Kate, he says, nothing will make sense to your American ears, and you will doubt everything we do, but in the end, you will understand. So it's basically a prophecy that we see come true, even though she may not still entirely have accepted it. But by the end of the film, she does seem to understand it. And then when they're in Juarez, when they're going to this whole operation where they have, the Mexican cops in the back of trucks with like full auto weapons with a belt, ammunition, and then there's those bodies that are hanging from the bridge, and the Jeffrey Donovan character, who he's almost like a shaman type of character. He's sort of this guide that's taking, because he's just sort of talking, like he's not really talking to anybody in particular, but everybody who's in that SUV is familiar with what's going on. But he's sort of almost like like
A
a
spirit
shaman
guide.
who's kind of guiding her through this experience that she's never had before. He's probably
He's the
had dozens
Virgil.
of these.
He's the Virgil to her
Mhm.
Dante. Yeah,
Yes.
taking her into hell. And of course, I mean, I'm sure actually, as far as I in the book that I'm trying to get published, I have a poem called Juarez Nequia, which is about. I'd heard a story from a friend of mine about a friend of hers who had crossed the border the other way into Juarez, as part of something, as part of the same thing happening here, which is an interesting concept. Which probably there's no need for it to happen. You can go freely across, but it's interesting in terms of carrying contraband or whatever. It was a story I heard. But that Juarez is probably it's probably pretty based in a lot of ways. The movie, obviously, this is a movie, but this is like, do you remember when the Karanka was happening? I remember I used to watch this live stream of like these rodeos and then parties, and it was a great thing to see because in Mexico nobody had El Masco on. Nobody was talking about Stabby. Everybody was just walking around freely, and it was a great thing to watch. So it's pretty interesting. I think Darth brings up a good point there. He says, interesting how Del Toro compares killing Fausto to discovering a Stabby. I'm going to say Stabby because I don't want to get Maddie in trouble here with the toss. But he compares it to a Stabby. He says, imagine how that would be, right? And I think that, again, that's two-sided because if he's comparing finding out this information to stopping the flow of a disease coming into the country, well, what does the movie imply that also what comes with the implication of that? The implication. What comes with that? A lot of death, right? A lot of death that comes with the Stabby. The Stabby causes that. So I thought that was an unintentional thing that came out in this. This movie was made way before the thing, but I thought that was probably an unintentional consequence of that reference in that. So double-sided.
Yeah, definitely. And I was thinking because like I mentioned, I was kind of watching this time around with drug cartels do not exist in mind, and one of the things that Zavala talks about in that book is that these areas where they said like the violence was the worst, he said if you look at the data on it, it actually wasn't that bad until the police and the military went in, and we know from years back that the CIA and even the OSS before that has been, I think it was Wild Bill Donovan, who was one of the pioneers of counterinsurgency and counterterrorism, right? And so one of the thing I kind of got into this in that stream, but it got a little too
Yeah,
spicy.
Donovan and Angleton for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like this is with the Zetas. Now I was kind of vaguely familiar with them, and then on an episode of the Jimmy Dore show, Kurt Metzger got into talking about them a little bit, how they were trained by the U.S. And so this group called the Zetas, I can't even, I mean, I'll post the link. It's on my phone right now. I'll post it in the description later. But there's a great article from Al Jazeera where it talks about what these people did. Now, one of the things I'll try to use coded language here. There were 72 migrant workers who were taken out and were just piled up, like literally piled up at a ranch near the U.S. border. This was in August, so I guess 2010. So this is an article from 2010. This is from years ago. But this group was trained. They came out of the Mexican military, and they were trained at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And so this guy who was a special forces commander, he said they were given map reading courses, communication, standard special forces training, light to heavy weapons, machine guns, and automatic weapons. So these people were because they were, Mexican military, were given, U.S. military training in the U.S. And then, so yeah, it said that their U.S. training was designed to prepare them for counterinsurgency and, ironically, counter narcotics operations. Although Deere was the guy they were quoting, says they were not taught the most advanced commando techniques available at Fort Bragg. Now, if he's telling the truth, maybe it's at a limited hangout type of thing. We don't know. But Yeah, I mean, these are the people who were. I never watched any of these videos because I had no interest in that. But the videos where people would talk about, you'd see on Live Leak, right, where they would people who were involved with cartels would,
Chainsaws.
yeah, and so these these were people like they were doing. It says in the article they were making and posting these videos on the internet, and apparently, yeah, I mean, a lot of this I can't even talk about it, but um, and it would somebody they were quoting, I can't remember who this bricker. So this is a Mexico-based researcher. She said that other cartels have accused them of not following the gentleman's code of drug trafficking and causing undue violence. So, she said at one time it was considered bad form to take out women who were, going to have children soon, but not anymore because the Zetas they didn't care. Like they would take these people out, and so that it's just it's worth mentioning to kind of bring all this together. This
Yeah.
group of people that came out of the Mexican military,
Yeah.
trained in the U.S. at Fort Bragg by the U.S. Special Forces,
Well, that's
then go back to
yeah.
Mexico. They engage in drug trafficking, so then they're basically a cartel themselves, and they go above and beyond any kind of violence, and they're the ones who put it out for mass consumption. So I say all that to say that, and when the Jeffrey Donovan character says, you have these naked bodies hanging from the bridge. He says, "Oh, it's brilliant what they do because it sends the message that they were involved and that they did something." And so it's like, because I always wonder, it's like, why are all these civilians? If you do any research on this, like, why are it always civilians? And then it makes you wonder, is this like Phoenix program type of things
Exactly.
going on? That's
Yeah.
what it brings to mind.
Jeffrey Dahmervin.
Yeah,
Um, no, this is absolutely Phoenix. I think this type of thing was probably proto pioneered with the early OSS in World War II, and Merrill's Marauders and those groups. The first instances of American, before the Green Berets came about and their modern MO. But certainly, this is the MO of Phoenix program. This is what Hearts and Minds is. We think of Hearts and Minds as, Radio Free Europe is going to drop leaflets saying you can have free McDonald's if you become America. But Hearts and Minds is the opposite. Hearts and Minds is shattering the hearts and minds of the local population into submission, to know that there's chaos. There's no reason for things happening. It's just that things are bad. This is what Phoenix program did. And Lansdale sort of pioneered this in Vietnam, with the vampire activities that they did. This is one of the first parts of the book Phoenix program by Doug Valentine, having snatch and grab operations on trails, capturing the last person on a Viet Cong trail, hanging them upside down, draining them of blood, and putting a sign with the phoenix on it saying saying this is the vampire did this, because if the person is vampirized, then they are forced to wander the nebulous, hellish afterlife of the Vietnamese culture and religion. So it shatters the hearts and minds of the population into thinking, well, this is bad. We need to just submit to whatever this is. I don't know about his speech. His speech is interesting. Again, it's kind of like axiomatic. It's like one of two ways. It's either he's telling the truth here, and this is true on the surface of it, what he's saying, which is that the people think that they must have been involved somehow, so it's sending a message of submit, we're in control, and these are just random people. What's probably the truth of it is that they were involved somehow, right? Somehow they were involved. Either they crossed the cartel, they didn't earn, they were involved with the family in a hit. Like there was recently in the news, there was one of the guys who was he was one of the musicians. What do you call those guys? They're musicians for they make cartel music
Narco
in Mexico.
Corridos,
Yeah, that's it. And the guy,
great music.
yeah, and his family, yeah, his El Patron de Mal, his family was taken out. His wife and mother, and her mother. But I think that the chatter is that was a result of the mother not paying or having something to do with being in league somehow with the cartel. So it comes across as, oh, they're going to get anybody, right? but in reality, it's probably business is business. Not that that makes it better or worse. I'm just saying but kind of both things end up being true because no matter what, whether they were involved or not, nobody knows for sure. And it introduces this form of chaos where it's almost medieval, right? In the worst way, where you're seeing bodies hanging from bridges. It also reminds me of the Blackwater operation gone wrong in was it Afghanistan? Remember, that's why Blackwater got in trouble. A couple of the guys were captured after that shooting, and then they were hanged from the bridge, and that sort of precipitated the end of Blackwater, or at least Blackwater having to change names and turn into Triple Canopy and all that. So it reminds me of it has all the hallmarks of a paramilitary operation in a foreign country, and so but like you said, he is the Virgil to Kate, what's her name, Emily Blunt's Dante, making its way into the underworld. I mean, into the underworld, south of the United States, into the wilderness and across the chasm of the border into this hellish landscape, right? So it's pretty, right into the prison, right into the bowels of the prison. I love the marshals, by the way. Those are the two marshals, and he's like, I love Texas. They're like, hey, you're gonna need some help with that sidearm, buddy. Right? They're the ones that have to take the guy into custody. Mm-hmm. Got this whole wide cast of characters, including Delta. You never see Delta Force portrayed in movies. I thought that was one interesting aspect alone of this.
Yeah, right? No, that was pretty cool that they.
It was cool that they didn't use the typical SEALs,
Yeah, and that. Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing. Yeah, I think that it's a good point about it. The thing with the bodies hanging from the bridge is it's chaos because okay, is it? The Mexican military and their cops that are doing this? Is it, a Zetas type of group? Is it in that? Because I want to be clear. I'm not saying that, if we, and I'm, after, not to keep going back to, Zavala, but it's like after reading that, it's really made me think about, the way we think of and kind of discuss drug cartels, but just for the sake of conversation, it's not to say that these, cartels are not dangerous, violent groups that do take people out. Like I'm not saying that, but it's just like, and I don't know, like it's not apologetics for the, to try to defend these people, but it's just that, just think about like, okay, what's actually, looking at data, looking at, how things are portrayed in media and kind of trying to
or portrayed in the movie. I mean, the whole point of the movie is that they're going to take control of the cartel. That's exactly what happens in the movie. Yeah.
Because when they get back from El Paso after, because I guess we keep mentioning it. So they go get this Guillermo guy who's, high up in the cartel, and they get him out of a jail in Juarez. They're going across the bridge back to El Paso. They open up the lane for them so they can get through. What ends up happening is a car breaks down, and it seems to me that was intentional because then you have these two cars full of like street level gangsters who try to kill the team that's going in to that has Guillermo. So they all get taken out pretty quickly. And
great scene.
Oh, it's a fantastic scene. And then so
Cálmate, ¿quieres morir?
One of the guys says that, because like you mentioned where he said, he was like, oh, this is going to be on every TV station in the country. And I think it was a Jeffrey Donovan character was kind of laughed. He's like, this won't even make the papers in El Paso. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of wondered if it could go either way. It's that he's saying this is so routine that it's just kind of like another day at the border, or that there's some kind of, power structure is, can kill stories, keep things from getting out. But then when they get back to El Paso, I guess it was the Air Force Base, Graver.
Luke Air Force Base.
Yeah, Luke Air Force Base. Graver tells Kate, he says, our goal is to shake things up and create chaos. Yeah. So it's intentional that they're going down there and they're trying to agitate, because we're learning more and more. We get it in pieces kind of along with Kate, like whereas she's going through the film, learning what's happening. We are, now granted, we know a little bit more, but we're basically learning the ins and outs of it, the details. Yo, we got Block Party Vintage in the house. What's up, Block Party?
Block Party. It's also biblical language that they use. We're going to shake the tree And this is what you have. What happens when you cut off the head of the snake, right? So we're in a. There's a kind of Edenic allegory used here, right? That now we see what happens when you take the fruit off the tree. Now you're going to know. You're going to know what happens. And when you cut the head off the snake, you see, do you want to see some fireworks? He takes her up there and we see a bunch of explosions. So there's going to be a power struggle, and that they're going to have to, we don't know this on the first watch of the movie, that they're going to have to introduce a new snake, literally slithering through the tunnels on the way. We see constant kind of serpentine imagery in the movie. So we're going to introduce this new serpent into the situation, and we don't know yet that that's going to be Alejandro, right? Who is Benicio is so good in this movie, right? He really is so good. He comes across as the lawyer Alejandro. What are you doing here? Just not answering questions. He saves Emily Blunt in that one situation, but this is all for a further, this is the long con. This is a situation that goes far into the future with future implications. And that's not really known until we learn what Medellin means. Now, we assume Medellin means that he's Colombian, that he has something to do with the Colombian cartel, but it's actually more than that, right? That Josh Brolin explains later that Medellin refers to a time when the drug trade was under our control. And we know that through Barry Seal. That's why the book about killing Pablo is kind of so probably not even purposefully disingenuous, but there are elements mixed into that with los pepes, los hijas de muerta, right? The daughters of death, the group that was CIA trained. Like you said, there's a long history of foreign groups, paramilitary groups training at Fort Bragg, especially at the School of the Americas. And the reason it's Fort Bragg, they do it there, is because, of course, the MO, the stated mission of the Green Berets, is counterinsurgency. Usually that happens outside of the country. You insert Green Berets into a place and they train the native population, Montagnards or whatever you have to fight the regime that they're tasked with fighting. But the training can occur here. That happened with the Contras. That was, notoriously happened with the Contras. It happens with things like Henry Lee Lucas and the Hand of Death cult, supposedly. And I'm sure that continues to this day. So.
Yeah, and that's just another, because with Alejandro and these kind of bits that we get about his life, two things on this. One of them is I was reading about this a little while back, is in the original script, he was supposed to have these monologues where he was telling Kate about his life and how he came to be who he is. And Benicio himself told the director, he was like, this doesn't make any sense for this character to do this, because he's very closed off. He has few lines. Why would he just suddenly go and, talk about the worst part of his life to this woman he barely knows? And so that's why, so they cut a bunch of his lines, which, that's for most, I think that shows how serious he is of an actor and cares more about the film than himself.
Yes.
Because
Yeah. Well,
a lot of
how they made it come out, by the way, is that when he saves her, he says, "You remind me of somebody very dear to me."
yeah.
We assume watching it that she reminds him of his wife,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there seems to be a love interest there, the way that he looks at her. But then we learn that he's much more pure in his intentions and his objectives. Depends on what you mean by pure, but pure in terms of his vengeance, because it's actually his daughter
Right.
that she reminds him of. And then we learn the thing later through Josh Brolin, through his dialogue, right, about they cut off his wife's head and then they put his daughter in a vat of acid. There's a great Bryan Cranston movie about this, by the way, where he I forget the name of the movie, but it shows him, interacting with the Colombian cartel. I think it's set in the 70s and 80s, and he goes through this sort of thing. Same thing happens in The Counselor, and obviously Breaking Bad deals with this sort of thing too, but in terms of meth. But yeah, I thought you make a great point. That it's not. This is a great point about actors and movie making that's different from theater. The Informant, yes, Jethro. That it's not the dialogue. It's kind of like Benicio in that movie, The Hunted, right? The Hunted, where if you cross this line, right, it's like, it's not the saying of things. It's all in how they convey it through looks, through showing it through his eyes and through his actions in the movie. And that makes the movie more mysterious for a purpose, right? That we can't know this character. We don't know him. And when we do finally get to know him, it's tricky because even in that last scene where he eliminates the family, it's like you do sympathize with him. Even though he's doing something horrible here, you do sympathize with him at that point. So it's pretty deceptive.
Yeah, absolutely. I did make some. We got to get to that. I did make some notes about what happens at the end, and one of the things, because before he goes and tortures Guillermo, he runs into, I didn't know if the guy was a prosecutor or some kind of official in Mexico, and he tells Alejandro, he's like, oh, I'm sorry about what happened on the border. And then he says, he tells him, he says, I control what I can. And so that, I think, is another layer of, and again, not to keep, beating on this drum, but, that's part of Zavala's thesis, is that the drug trafficking is controlled by the Mexican government. And that would be controlled, at a higher level, like by, the power elite. But that they do have, that these people don't just run rampant, do whatever. I mean, they might in some cases, but that there is some level of control that the Mexican government is wielding over the traffickers. And then another, we talked about this, I think, in the stream, where we just kind of started riffing about the movie. But one thing I did want to touch on is Alejandro's use of violence, because he doesn't, whereas Josh Brolin's character, who again appears to be a psycho, he seems to enjoy it. And like the Jeffrey Donovan character, I don't know if he necessarily enjoys it, but he's like the guy that's like, I love this, this is what I do, is going and doing these operations. Whereas Alejandro, it's interesting because the measure of the violence that he dishes out, or the level of it, is always measured. He always goes, there's no wasted shots, right? There's no
bang bang. Ooh, he goes bang bang. Ooh, right. Yeah,
it's almost like, hey, and they give the guys a chance. Like even the other guys in the other car, they give them a chance. Like, hey, you guys can walk away, and they don't. But so whether he's torturing somebody, whether he's shooting somebody, whatever, beating somebody, like whatever it is, it's always to a point. There's a purpose to it. It's not. It's like I compared him to Rust Cole in True Detective season 1. The violence is always for a purpose. It's to serve another end. It's not gratuitous. It's not out of any kind of enjoy. There's no sadism to it. He's not enjoying it. It's just, I'm doing this
professional.
It will get me to what I need. And even something I hadn't noticed before is at the end, when he shoots Fausto's family, he actually, I'd never picked up on this before. He shoots, and even though he shoots them all in like 2 seconds, he shoots his wife first. And I took that to mean that so she didn't have to watch, even if it was only for a split second, she didn't have to watch her son's getting killed.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, and even though it's brutal to, like shoot two young people like that. But another thing is, he takes out all of the guards. But then when he walks past the kitchen and he kind of pauses and he looks over and he sees the maid and she's holding a bowl or cutting.
He doesn't shoot Anita. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he just kind of looks at her and then turns and just keeps going, because he's basically, it's like a threat assessment, right? And he realizes she poses no threat, and if she's been working for
he doesn't shoot Consuela. She's like, yeah, this Windex.
Yeah. I mean, it's he probably knows that he has nothing to worry about. Like, she's not going to go running.
He also shot the family in the same order as his family was killed, right?
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
We learned, the respective shooting. We learned that his wife died first and then his daughter, or at least that's the way that the guy explained it in the hallway. The other, whoever that guy was, lawyer, prosecutor, guy working in court in tandem with the State Department or whatever. He's a State Department. He's a DOD advisor. It's so funny. You're not a DOD advisor. Well, of course, that's what he's going to say.
Of course.
She's so naive in the movie. I just don't understand how she could be that naive.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, if all you go to college and then you get out, you go work for the FBI and you start doing SWAT. I mean, she doesn't seem to be a very curious type of person. We don't know
Yeah,
a lot about her.
he tells her, don't go in the bank. Don't
Yes,
go in
yeah,
the bank,
Graver tells
dumbass.
her,
And then,
he's
oh,
like, don't do it.
we can get him right here. Right. Her thing is, we can get him right here. And you're going to do, she's doing exactly what she's been doing. Right.
Yeah,
Before that, which is, uh, trying to get the immediate threat, and they're going to be right back on the street, and it's not even
mhm,
illegal what they've been doing, making the deposits, but she wants to go after it anyway because of her naivete. But then that's the whole reason she's there, is because of her
right.
naivete, right? So
Yes, because she doesn't know anything.
yeah,
Um, and uh, let's see. One thing. This is a random note I made is in the when they're going out to the because they find this tunnel. So I guess we really haven't done much of the plot, but so they go to this detention center where they have a bunch of people who've crossed the border illegally, and they're putting them on DHS buses
yeah,
and deporting them. And so they go in and they're asking them, trying to find this tunnel, like where did you cross? Because they're looking for an area that's being
that they've
avoided, and
avoided.
this is what they're using. The drug traffickers are using, and when they're leaving to go out on that raid of the tunnel, yeah, I thought it seemed to me to be a bit of foreshadowing because when they're driving the SUVs out of the motel parking lot, the three or four or whatever go over a speed bump, and it sounds like gunshots.
Yeah,
It's sort of a foreshadowing of what's about to happen. So then they find this tunnel, which again is, I mean, you could say like, okay, a tunnel, they use that because it works, but it's another where there's seems to be a discrepancy, or not discrepancy, but like a mismatch in terms of technology. Because again, if these people are so advanced, they have so much money, they're untouchable. Well, the U.S. is using what seems to be almost like satellite surveillance because they're
yeah, thermal
surveilling.
imagery. Yeah,
Yeah, they're surveilling one of was it Emmanuel, one of the high ups in the cartel, and he doesn't even notice. So
yeah,
it's clearly they're not just like flying a drone
yeah,
over his house, and so they go out there, and yeah, it's just there are no rules of engagement. They go in, and it's just carnage, chaos, just kill everybody.
yeah, yeah. It reminded me of that Leo movie. Body of Lies. It's the same, almost the same exact thing that happens there. He's being followed. There's a scene I really like that movie, by the way. It's pretty revelatory for this. Their point in that movie, by the way, with the footage that they're trying to find in the data, is that one of the things I think they did was that in that movie they show a staged, a fake flag event where they get bodies from the morgue and then blow up a section of a military base safely, and then send it out to the media, and then they track on the discs who's disseminating it. And so when they find the disc, they can find the source code for it and see who's doing it, and then they can find the group, and then they do that in order to find who's supposed to be, I don't know, Hakani or whoever it is uh, in the movie. And it's the same thing that Leo looks up and he sees a glint in the sky and he says, "You're attracting too much attention. Get the fuck out of here!" Right? Well, that's because in the open landscape of Iraq, where the movie's set, they're used to this after a 20-year war. Or at the time, I guess it was probably 7 years, but counting the 90s, it would be, almost a 20-year war with drone footage. Of course, the Mexicans and the Mexican cartel doesn't have they don't have the same awareness of the drone. I mean, that's a pretty self-contained thing. You've got a drone operator and you've got guys who are probably hard to compromise within the U.S. military cellular network in order to find out drone. You can't have real time drone footage and stuff. Maybe they do. I don't know. Maybe that's naive. But yeah, that the guy, when they finally clue in on the guy's location, they can track his phone. It seems like they would be able to do that through NSA anyway. But then they finally track him. But yeah, the thermal imagery is another sort of weird kind of 2001 esque sequence, because they're going into a tunnel in a foreign land, like it's something like they're going into the underworld, right? Making their way through the tunnel, and it also reminded me of El Chapo, right? Remember the story about El Chapo escaping from the cartel controlled prison, where he had he just had a trap door. They tunneled up into his cell, right? Which is pretty amazing story. He just climbs down a ladder, gets on a motorcycle, and then rides out, right? And I know that, as far as the tunnels, like why, of course they're going to be tunneling from their side under the border wall right up into a house, it seems. So yeah, that's what they do at the beginning. Yeah. Man, this Red Bull and this Prime drink are really getting to me, folks. I'm just jittery as heck.
I was just reading what Circle G said. And he said, I grew up in the Rio Grande Valley, South Texas. It was safe growing up post-NAFTA and Big Nine. Everything slowly rolled downhill. In the film, after the bridge gunfight, where they say, no one will care because the violence is totally commonplace and local media will not report on it. Mm-hmm. So, there we go. Somebody who's right there is, come from that area. And that's where a lot of this, comes up from.
Well, I have someone close to me who lives in El Paso, and she crosses the border all the time into Juarez. Has family there, and it's kind of going back and forth. And it's also interesting when you look at the crossover. It's like you can go freely into Juarez, but the way back is totally clogged up, right? Which makes me think of these videos that I'm seeing of like when what's the guy's name? The Fox News guy, not Bill Hemmer, but Bill Malushin, like interviewing guys silhouetted who are Chinese nationals who are like, well, I came over here and then I cross over into the border. And it's like, I always tend to think like, why would you be doing that? Why wouldn't you just fly here and then why wouldn't you just fly and then stay? Why do you need to fly to Mexico first and then cross over? That doesn't really make any sense to me. Why would Chinese nationals be doing this?
Right. I'm guessing because they'd have to have a passport and possibly get detained by customs, and
they would have a passport. They would have to have a passport to get on a plane to get to Mexico, wouldn't they? Unless they crossed on a ship. Something, unless they were a shipping container. I mean, I don't
ditch the passport. I mean, they could just toss it and then come through like, I don't know, I don't have any papers or anything. Something else I was going to say. Oh yeah, to be clear, I just want to make the point that it's not to say, I'm not saying the cartels are primitive, because in that scene where you mentioned earlier, where they're at the Air Force base, and one of the guys there tells Katie, he's like, hey, you want to see some fireworks? I come up on the roof. So he gives her some binoculars. He's like, look over there. And you see like an actual missile or some kind being shot. And
an RPG.
Police cars. Yeah, like an RPG. And then you see police cars coming in. So clearly they do have serious heavy weaponry.
Yes.
My point is just that they seem to be indicating that that the narrative that we're told about the cartels is potentially not accurate, that they're and then I think we touched on this earlier, is so Alejandro finally, he uses, so there's one thing I forgot to mention. There's a police officer in Mexico has scenes interspersed through the film. He's he's kind of a dirtbag and clearly corrupt, but he's clearly not making a lot of money, because he has a house, it's decent sized, but it's he's not living in like a tin apartment, but he has a wife and a son.
Quiero huevos rancheros para desayuno. Right, he's eating his eggs.
Oh yeah, with the jalapenos.
Pásame la café. Right, or whatever.
And
I hate the sound of him eating, by the way. That always bothered me in the movie. He's sitting on the edge of the bed. He's sitting on the edge of the la cama, eating los huevos, drinking his café, right? And you can hear this. It's gross. And he's like, don't touch that, right?
Oh, because his son goes to touch his rifle, and he's like, no, don't touch that. And so we see scenes interspersed with this guy, and then he finally we see he's in one of the tunnels, and he's helping. He was carrying who knows how many kilos of
he's the bag
cocaine in his trunk, and they're trying to get him out, and then
heroin.
Alejandro comes in and kills the guy who he's with, the cop is with. And then, so Kate was supposed to go with everybody else. She goes the other way, follows Alejandro in there.
Pulls a gun
And
on him. What are you doing?
yeah, it's crazy. And so
What are
he
you
shoots.
doing? Like you're going to make an arrest in Mexico. And
Yeah,
you're
like
FBI. What are you doing?
you're gonna arrest this like highly trained
So I thought
assassin.
that was weak. I thought that was not believable. That was stupid. I thought.
I think it
I
was
guess
believable
maybe
because
believable because of her character within the movie. It's like, what are you doing? That was stupid. Never point a gun at me, he says.
yeah, because
I like how he shoots her cowboy style.
yeah, because she was wearing the armor plate,
Yeah.
and so yeah, gets shot twice. Yeah, and then
Sidearm.
tells her, never point a gun at me. But I think it is believable because her character is just like so naive and
Yeah.
so, just kind of dumb in some ways.
Yeah.
But so then he uses this cop to drive him out to go intercept this Emmanuel. I think Diaz was his name. This guy who's going to take him to Fausto, and so then he pulls him over, and then he just ends up executing the cop. Just shoots him
Yeah.
and drives off.
You knew that was going to happen too. Yeah.
Yeah, like you knew that was, which will lead to the final scene in the film, which is actually I think the saddest part of the movie. But so then he gets into Fausto's house and he's eating dinner with his family. Like we mentioned, Alejandro takes out his wife and his two sons, and then so you would presume that even though Fausto is living in luxury and he's at the top of the food chain,
Sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry, just to interrupt. I just realized that his name is Fausto Arcon, so he's an archon. He's Faust the Archon, right? He's he's bigger than life. He's Anyway, sorry.
That's an interesting
Yeah.
point. I hadn't caught that. But I mean, and I'm not an insider of this kind of criminal underworld, but I would imagine to get to where he is, you have to get your own hands dirty. Like you can't just start and be the one to like direct everybody else from day one. So this guy is clearly, probably taken out his share of more than his share of people, but you can see the shock and the horror when his own family, and because Alejandro tells him, he's like, you have people's families executed every night, and he tells me, he's like, oh, whatever, like it's not personal. And then when he sees it himself, then it's like this guy who's presumably taken who knows how many lives, and then it's like when it happens to you, it's a whole different level.
Well, that speaks to the fact that that humanizes him in a way, which makes it a stronger film and it's stronger in terms of the truth. I mean, people involved in this, I'm sure, this is like any mob figure having a family, living at home. This is what the Sopranos, at a very basic level, this is the Sopranos. You're trying to provide for your family. You're trying to make a better life for your family, and this occurs through a number of things. Probably starts from youth, like with the Pablo story, or starts with military experience or whatever. A lot of times it's like in the movie, it also shows that Alejandro is a lawyer, right? Maybe a money launderer, a prosecutor, who has contacts with the cartel and then ends up being the assassin. And a lot of times the assassin or the right-hand man or the financier, whoever makes his way to the top, right, after the guy's gone. So it's not always just a straight line there. So I thought that was
a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. I think because the only thing we know that Alejandro had done previously was be a prosecutor, but he clearly has some kind, because this guy, his what's the word I'm looking for? Like his skill in combat is on par, if not surpassing the Jeffrey Donovan characters. Like this is a guy who is accurate. He's controlled. So he clearly, for all we know, he got special forces training in.
Well,
in
he's
the
literally
US.
CIA clear. He's got clearance to be in the meetings. He's literally CIA trained. He's CIA attached. And as Josh Brolin states, the stated mission is to turn a guy like this loose, like to point him in the right direction and turn him loose. So yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's clearly it's not, just like, Oh, he was just some
He
prosecutor and then
right.
became because he's not
He's not Atticus Finch. Yeah.
yeah, he's not like a Charles Bronson kind of, which I like the Death Wish movies, but he's not like a Charles Bronson. This is clearly a guy who has been trained at the highest levels.
Mhm.
Uh, and then at the end, it goes back to, and this is like really one of the, I guess we don't want to skip over the scene. So Kate is out on her balcony and smoking a cigarette, and
Yeah.
we hear Alejandro say, "You shouldn't stand on balconies for a while." So he
Yeah.
broke into her apartment, and then
He
she,
click. Yeah.
yeah,
You
so
don't want
she
to.
tells
Yeah.
her, he tells her,
Yeah.
he has a, some kind of document. He tells you, you need to sign this. It says we did everything by the book. She's like, I'm not signing that. And so that's when he holds the gun up under her face and
Yeah.
is like, you have to sign this. And so
He's
she
got his
eventually,
Darth Vader black glove on so he doesn't get cordite. Right.
right.
And he's using her weapon. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he almost, it seems to me at the end, he kind of seems to, because he always seems to have some kind of like level of affection for her, clearly, because of what he says, where he reminds her, she reminds him of his daughter. But then at the end there, um, when he's walking out, she goes out on her balcony and is pointing a gun at him. And he kind of turns around and just with
He
no
does.
expression, just stares. And it almost seems like he has, at that point, he gains some kind of level of respect. And that's just what I took from it. That was kind of
What I
my.
took from that scene was that he has a kind of Faustian affection for her, right?
Mhm.
He's wiping the tears away to sign her soul away on this paper. And
Mm.
then when he walks out, I love the way he walks. When he walks out, he's got this gate and he's throwing the pistol away. She assembles it back together. She stands back out on the balcony, just like he said not to. And he turns around and then notice what he does. He's kind of turning profile to her. And then he turns and he stands full on to her, which is to say, this is your test. If you're going to do it right now. I'm waiting. Right. And he's ready. And she doesn't. And then he turns around and walks, it's interesting also because the end of the movie looks like dusk. I mean, looks like a dawn.
Yeah.
So this is the dawn of a new era rather than into the sunset as some kind of man in black. Instead, he's walking instead of walking into the dusk as a man in black, he's walking into the dawn of a new era, which is going to be obviously sequels. I think there's a third in the making, but he's also walking into this new an NWO in terms of the drug trade that has dawned at the end of the film.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. That's a good day. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is that yeah because the first time she pulls a gun on him, she points it right at his face, and
Yeah.
that's when he tells her like don't ever point a gun at me. But then she originally was going to shoot him in the back, which is the most cowardly thing you can do. And yeah, I think that's a good point. Is that he's saying like if you're going to do it, like I'm here. You've got a shot. There's nothing I can do. And
Yeah.
so that yeah, and because I hadn't really paid attention to the fact that it did seem like a dawn.
It's the exact opposite of a Simpson Bruckheimer movie, starting at dawn, ending at dusk, right, with an
Yeah.
American flag waving. Instead, this is something completely, like almost completely the opposite. Starting with the black screen of the epigraph, talking about, like you said, the etymology of the Sicario, and then into the sepia tones of this foreign world, looking from almost the God's eye view. It's obviously supposed to be like a drone view of the world, and then ending on the ground in a motel parking lot and on a balcony, right, overlooking events, overlooking him. And she's, go find a small place, a small town to live in, which is probably exactly what she's going to do. If she has any sense, that's exactly what she would do. She's been totally compromised. Of course, her mission stated, that she's been compromised. She was ordered to do this from the top. She continually had missions with the guys who were like, look, these decisions are made far from here, far above us, which is to say that, the president probably in the movie signed off on the events taking place to create chaos and to have an order al Caio. One thing that annoys me about the movie is her smoking habit, in the sense that this is her vice. In the movie, it's like there's one point where the guy's like, took up smoking again, huh? And she's like, yeah. It's like, that's her vice. She's under a lot of stress. There's also another thing that women do this in movies a lot. This is most notable in Scarface. There's a scene where Michelle Pfeiffer is sitting at her vanity, and she like takes a bump, and then she like lights a cigarette, and then she like drinks something, and then when she smokes, women notice how women do this in movies. If you notice the next time a woman's doing this under stress in a movie, they'll light a cig, they go like this, then they go, and they put their hand up on their hair. They always do that in movies. Oh, light the cigarette, and then I'm under such stress, right? One of the good points, that's a small picky point in the movie. It's also funny, the obvious movie brand cigarettes that they have, which is always like native tobacco, right? But the good point, I think a good thing about this movie is this might have been Johan Johansson's final film score. He's the guy who did the Denis Villeneuve film scores before Hans Zimmer took over. So he was an Icelandic film composer who died of I think he died of a cocaine overdose in a hotel in Iceland. And he was fantastic. I think he won an Oscar. Bald guy, fantastic. He really pioneered the film score in this, which is there are a number of scenes that are punctuated with this rumbling, heavy, synthetic. It's a synth, and it's like when you turn on the movie, it's the TV is shaking, and it's this foreboding sense of doom, and it's often metallic, striking metallic noise, like a kind of this the sense that it's almost like a alien heartbeat of this land that we're getting, mixed with this foreboding doom going over a totally illuminated landscape. So I thought that was particularly good. I think he was the composer. He must have done the movie Enemy by Villeneuve. I'm gonna look up his other films real quick. I don't know if he had died by the time Arrival came out, but he didn't do he didn't do Dune. But the Hans Zimmer scores are obviously, Hans Zimmer has been getting a lot of credit for his film scores, like with Dune, but obviously they are just taken from. I don't know if they're taken from him, but they obviously take his music as a cue here. So I'm going to look up his. Yeah, Johan Johansson. Yeah, he did Sicario. He did Arrival. Sicario, Arrival. Let's see. He did the Prisoners, of course, which I covered. Prisoners is a great example of that. That's another Denis Villeneuve movie. So yeah, R.I.P. to him. He died in 2018.
Oh, I didn't even know about that. That's a bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah, the score is good because it's almost like you realize it when you're watching it, but there's none of it that really stands out, because a lot of times with music in film, it's either, and in some cases it works where you can have lyrics, like music that you have lyrics to it, which will usually be like the scene in the bar, for example.
Yeah.
Right, where they have they're playing like honky tonk music, which then kind of inexplicably changes to this kind of like almost indie pop type of thing. It's like, this is a cowboy bar. Why are you dancing to I don't know, whatever.
Doesn't she know that she's going to be midnight climaxed in this scene? I mean, come on. Like, the guy, you mean John Bernthal in the bar. Have a little more OPSEC, right?
Yeah. You would think.
The cinematography was done by Roger Deakins, one of the great cinematographers of all time. Of course, I just covered his assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
That was a good stream.
Where he stated that probably his proudest moment as a photographer, as a film photographer, cinematographer, director of photography, is the train arrival scene in that, where Brad Pitt is standing on the train tracks at the edge of where they've blocked it off, and they're about to rob the train, and it's coming in total darkness with steam rising. It's a great scene. Roger Deakins did Dune and all those movies. He's great.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a fantastic scene.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that takes us to the end, where I made a note that like Alejandro kind of did the reverse Actually no, there was one thing we touched on earlier, and I wanted to get back to it. Is Fausto asks Alejandro if he thinks the people he works for are any different. He said, "Who do you think we learned it from?" And there's kind of a double meaning in that, because it's like technic. So he's working because he doesn't. We don't know where his allegiance is. Alejandro's allegiance basically a lie with his dead wife and daughter. Like
That's
that's
right.
his allegiances, and
Yeah.
so we don't know. Does Fausto, is he saying that about the Colombians, like they learned it from the Colombians, or is he talking about the U.S.? Because as we've
Yeah.
talked about with the special forces training, and it's like, did he learn? Is he saying that we learned like the brutality? Does he mean both? And we don't. I don't. What did you make? Do you think he was talking about the Medellin cartel, or was he talking
No,
about
he was
the
talking. I think
U.S.?
he was. There's you can read into it, but I think he was talking about intelligence. He was talking about learning it from special operations and intelligence, and in terms of the hierarchy and the network, right? So obviously the cartel has their own network in terms of distribution, and then
Hmm.
within the United States, they use the mob and Hell's Angels and various criminal organizations to do that. But in terms of the structure and the trafficking of product, they learn this from and the security, right? They learn this from intelligence. They have to.
Right.
I mean, that's something this big. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars here, and so many people, and keeping the accounting off the books.
Hmm.
There's the John, what's his name, Perkins. There's a John Perkins
Yeah.
book
Yeah.
about this. So that's how I took it. Yeah.
And there's one thing because I think it's related to this, which is awesome. I'll put all these links in the description after, but this is a story that kind of blew up. Everybody reported on it, and then we just never heard about it again. This was from 2019, July 2019, where U.S. authorities in Philly seized a cargo vessel in June with nearly 20 tons of cocaine on board. The ship, as it turns out, is owned by a fund run by banking giant J.P. Morgan Chase. Um, so it says the ship is leased to a transportation agency fund run for the bank's asset management. Oh gosh, I got to pop up on here. By the bank's asset management unit. That means J.P. Morgan Chase does not have any operational control over the vessel, but it was run by. So yeah, it's run by somebody on behalf of them basically, and of course the bank had no comment. And they said
Yeah.
that the law enforcement agents boarded the ship. They found the cocaine, which is said to have a street value of about $1.3 billion. And they said that who's this? Some guy they were quoting. I think it's from the guys from the U.S. attorney. Yes, it was a U.S. attorney. Said when a vessel brings such an outrageous amount of deadly drugs into Philadelphia waters, um, my office and our agency partners will pursue the most severe consequences possible against all involved parties in order to protect our district and our country.
Uh-huh.
And this was the Mediterranean Shipping Company, the people operating it, said that unfortunately, shipping and logistics companies are from time to time affected by trafficking problems.
Mm.
MSC has a long standing history of cooperating with U.S. federal law enforcement agencies to help disrupt illegal narcotics trafficking. It's like, okay, you're disrupting it and you didn't know that 20 tons of cocaine was on the ship. Now, this is also relevant because now I haven't fact checked this. I heard somebody say once that a lot, and again, don't know if it's true, but it would make sense if it is. Um, a lot of cartel money is laundered through Wall Street. And I heard someone go as far as to make the claim that if the cartels were to be shut down and their money was pulled out of the investment, then basically the whole system would collapse because that's where they
Yeah.
get most of their money from is the cartels laundering money through the bank, through the Wall Street. Now, again, I have no idea if that's true or not, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was a good amount of that activity. It's like, what are the odds? Now, I'm not accusing Jamie Dimon or whoever runs. I think it's Jamie Dimon that runs J.P. Morgan of being a drug trafficker or anything, but it's just interesting that you would find that much. I mean, because that's a lot, 20 or 23, whatever tons.
Yeah, Wall Street,
$1.3
Prescott,
billion.
Bush, art market, probably futures market, um, the real estate market. Ironically, the film industry itself, it would be funny if the film itself was financed or was helping to do this, even without their knowledge.
Oh, that'd be hilarious.
Yeah. Also, one more thing about the. Do you know who's running? You is that that's sort of what occurs. The backlash against this is what occurs in the sequel. I mean, Josh Brolin and Alejandro end up having an adversarial relationship in the second one, and that it must be interesting to people who are involved, like for instance, the Delta Force guys, if they're involved in mercenary activity afterwards or in private security firms. It must be interesting to come across former teams members who are on the opposite side of things. So for instance, if you're tasked with guarding the cartel guy, you need the top security, so you're going to get the guys in the mercenary unit or in the security team. It's going to be a guy who's a former teammate of the guy who's going against you, right? So there's a bunch of Foreign Legion books about the Foreign Legion and autobiographies that deal with this sort of thing. It must happen all the time. That's the bad guys that we see in the Stallone and Schwarzenegger movies. That's what Matrix is in Commando, right? He's
Interesting.
Matrix is a former. He knows Arnold Schwarzenegger in the movie, right? Let off some. No, what's his name? Is it Matrix? Let off some steam, right? That guy. They're former teammates. And then, of course, they end up being on opposite side of things. Caravaggio says HSBC, Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, admitted to laundering billions for the cartels in the 2010s. Think they had to pay some fines. Yeah, we end up seeing these stories all the time. But, there's no, that's a great point.
None of that.
Bennett is his name. Thank you. Who's Matrix? He plays Matrix is that a different movie? Who's Matrix?
I don't know. I hadn't seen that in a long time, so I couldn't remember the character names.
Let off some steam, Bennett. Yeah.
But yeah, I have not seen The Day of the Soldado, the second one, but I don't know if there's enough to analyze. We might do that one in the future if you're down.
It's not. It's just a different variation. It goes into immigration, and Benicio goes through a completely different journey in that one. But it's not like this one. I mean, it is like this one, and it's pretty good, pretty decent flick. It's decent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have to watch it, and we'll see. But yeah, the final scene of the film is it sort of shows that nothing has really changed, because as Graver tells Kate, he explains the whole situation where you said like the Medellin refers to a time when the Medellin, Pablo Escobar's alleged cartel, ran everything. They were in control, and now they're trying to get that back because you have all these other cartels all vying for power, and it's too chaotic. And so they're trying to get some semblance of order. At least that's what he says, because this guy's, he's a spook, so like you can't really. I think he's being truthful about that, but the scene, it basically shows that nothing has changed because, like I said, I think it's a really kind of sad scene in the very poignant scene at the end where, so the corrupt cop, Alejandro just, shoots him and then leaves him on the road and just takes off, and it's like, whatever, forgets about the guy. But then the final scene is his son is standing there in his dad's bedroom. The bed's all made, and he's just kind of sitting there staring at it. And his whole thing, he wants his dad to go play soccer with him. And his dad's like, oh yeah, we will. But you don't ever know if he actually does or not.
Right.
And so then he, gets with his mother, and they go out to the soccer field, and, he's playing, they got a game going on. And it seems to be implied that they don't actually know what happened to his dad. They probably just assume, like, I'm sure his wife knew what he was up to an extent.
Oh yeah.
It's like, okay, this guy, he's just gone, and they'll probably never find his body or anything. But
that scene with the soccer game also, it makes me think of, this is life in Mexico, but this is the United States, especially now. It's the exact same thing. Hearing gunfire in the distance, and it's interesting because when Emily Blunt is about to, when she's on the balcony in that final scene, there's also the sound of children playing. So we got the dawn of a new day, but we still have children playing. And like you said, everything changes, but nothing changes. We literally get to the soccer game where life is going on. There's two different lives. There's over there and there's over here. And the two are getting closer to each other. Right. And they're also right next. It's also interesting because they're right next to the border wall. They're in Juarez. Yeah. And so are we supposed to think that the sound of gunfire is coming from the other side? Is it coming from up north? Right. So in other words, everything, like you said, everything changes and nothing changes. And this stuff is permeated, obviously, into the United States as if it hadn't been here already. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's yeah, it's, and that kind of goes back to what Graver tells Kate, is that this is what happens. Like this is basically the future of if we don't get control of this. And, I used to live in a not great neighborhood when I was in college, and it was really quiet during the day. And then at night, we'd get it never affected me because I wasn't involved in anything, but, we'd get drive-bys, we'd get shootouts, and it would always happen late at night though. Usually after 10 p.m. You could hear it going on like up the street, people like full on firefights. And this is different because it's broad daylight. It seems to be late morning when they're at the soccer game.
Well, listen, Matty, you didn't know this. You just lived 2 blocks from me, and that was me trying to keep the real estate prices in my neighborhood down. Bang, 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 and then walking back in and making some breakfast.
Based. But it's different because it's happened during the daytime. And it's another thing, like when they're doing the operation where they're going to get Guillermo out of the jail in Juarez, there's all this going on. And then there's people, they drive by this park, people are just hanging out. There's guys playing a game of handball. And it shows that these people just,
wholesome.
They basically, it's very wholesome. And they, so the soccer game stops and they all kind of look, and then, they just kind of go back to it. And it shows that it's sad because, the kid, you can look at it 2 ways. It's like, okay, you got this guy who's trafficking drugs, who's involved in this, and he's profiting off of it, and people are dying because of it. It's not just people dying from the drugs, it's all the violence that's associated with it. So it's like, okay, you take this one guy out, that's one less person involved, but they can just go find somebody else. But then you've got a kid who's going to grow up with no dad, and then we see that but it's also his dad is part of the problem of why there's a full-blown firefight going on in the morning while they're out having a soccer game. And it shows that like this, because what else in that situation, it's almost hopeful in a sense, because it's like, okay, you got this shooting and then they just go on about their lives. Because what else can you do in that situation? They're not cowering inside. They're not hiding. It's like, this is going on, but like, what can we do? Like, we'll just keep playing soccer, playing handball, hanging out with our friends. I mean, what else can you do in that kind of, just bloodbath of a situation?
Yeah. What can you do? I don't know. It's a good film.
Yeah.
It's a great film. Yeah, it's really good. Yeah.
Very good. Did you have anything else we didn't hit that you wanted to?
That's it. I think that's it. This was a good one. This is a really good one. And it's tightly done. It's pretty all-encompassing, great film. There aren't many great films like this around, so hopefully we'll get some more. I might be doing a wholesome stream with Jay and Jamie. We'll see when they get back from Vegas, but trying to do some wholesome movies. My idea was to cover Footloose as one of the main examples of this. Footloose is the complete opposite. Footloose is uses biblical uses scripture as the driving point for change in the community in that movie, the 1984 movie with Kevin Bacon. Dancing is outlawed in the town, so they cite Samuel and Psalms for their examples of wholesome dancing. And it's a great, feel-good movie. So if you got any ideas for wholesome movies, let me know over on my channel or in the comments below this one. I'll check it out. Babe might be another example of that. Swiss Family Robinson, we'll see.
Oh, that's a classic. Yeah, I always liked that one.
Swiss Family Robinson is probably my all-time, all-encompassing favorite film of all time, because taped it off of the Sunday night movie when I was a kid on the VCR, and I watched the movie a million times. It's a great movie, great wholesome movie. Princess Bride, good example. That's probably that's a wholesome movie, family.
Yeah.
So
It's in a totally different vein. I was going to, I don't know if you'd be into it, but Ponyo would be a really good one.
Okay, I'll check it out.
That's
Yeah,
I think it
I
was
haven't seen it.
studio. I'm almost positive it was a Studio Ghibli.
You say Ghibli.
Yeah.
Somebody else said Ghibli recently.
I've heard it pronounced different ways. I don't. Yeah, it's a Miyazaki movie.
Right.
It's I don't know. I think it's wholesome, but I haven't seen it in a long time. I need to rewatch that one. But anyway, yeah, that was a heck of a lot. Oh, Muppet Treasure Island. That's a good one. I always like that one. Tim Curry is that. See, I heard this quote once that said, "You can fairly well judge a man by the first thing he knows Tim Curry from." And for me, it's Muppet Treasure Island.
Mine is Clue. Yeah,
that's a good one too. Yeah.
I haven't seen the Skittles movie that's so famous. I've never seen it.
Picture Show.
Yeah, never seen it.
I saw it once. It was weird.
Yeah. You saw it at the midnight showing in costume?
Yes. Yeah. I went in costume and I threw.
They probably have those everywhere. I think that's still a thing, where they have that midnight show. I think they have one here. Of course, there's no need for that now because now that's just everywhere. So
exactly.
Daily life, you can just
people dressing up and doing weird things with food. Yeah. They used to do that. Where I live, they do like a live one. So whenever they'd show the movie, then for the musical numbers, they would have an actual cast come out and perform the. I never went to it, but like I knew people who were in it because my sisters knew them. It was weird, but anyway. Yeah, so that was a good one. But yeah, I don't have anything else. So thanks everybody for hanging out, and we will. If you have other movies you want to see, send them to me. You can email me or leave it in the comments, whatever, and let us know what you'd like to see. And some people have given me some suggestions. I haven't written them down somewhere. I need to find those, but we'll try to get to everything. So that'll do it. Y'all have a good night.
Peace, y'all.